And we're live. Welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce uh, Daniel Pinsky. He's the Chief Security Officer and responsible for compliance and governance at CDW Canada. And, I have the great pleasure to introduce people that are leaders in this space, who are also contributing back to the community. It's always a real pleasure to meet folks like that are really looking to give back and provide, whatever they've learned through the years and, be able to contribute back to the community. So, Daniel, thank you very much for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm honored to be here. So yeah, very happy.
So, where are you chatting from? You're based in Toronto, right? Toronto,
Yep,
Canada.
Toronto, Canada. Had a beautiful weekend. Just enjoying the summer weather. We don't get too much of it, so taking advantage of it.
That's very true. It turns from super cold to super hot almost instantaneously, right? So you got to take advantage while you can. Um,
Absolutely.
so why don't we get started, and maybe for people to get to know you a bit,
Sure,
maybe start with kind of your career path. How you started.
sure,
What was kind of your first role? What did you take in university and so on?
sure.
And then we'll kind of go from there.
So good question. And funny enough, growing up, I didn't really have a love for computers or things that are IT. Obviously, I went through school. Ended up going to McGill doing a Bachelor of Commerce.
Hmm.
Back then, I thought I may want to be an accountant or a lawyer. I wasn't really sure. What ended up happening when I was doing my undergrad is I got a job in an accounting firm in the IT department. And I remember my first job was really move computers from shelf A to shelf B. It really was just inventory. I was lucky enough, like many of us are. I had a mentor there that he kind of took me under his wing, and he started teaching me about computers and technology and networking. And when I began to take an interest in computers, I went to this individual and I said, I'm really interested in networking. What's the first thing I should learn? And he said, go learn Cisco. I started off getting a few Cisco certs under my belt. Uh, I then proceeded to get certifications in Checkpoint, in Microsoft, in Linux. And again, another mentor at the same organization. He took me under his wing and taught me all about information security. And he really introduced me to Linux and Unix. And I spent several years kind of getting better at Linux and Unix. Eventually, I worked my way up from just doing inventory to being on the network administration team. And then eventually, I kind of ran information security for that little accounting firm. And then it got to the point where, I wanted to expand my horizons. And obviously, banking and technology, it's a massive industry in Toronto. So I looked to Toronto to grow. I worked for the provincial government for about a year and a half. And then I worked at CIBC for 10 years. And even though I was in CIBC for 10 years, I moved around about every year and a half. I did a stint in governance and compliance. I did a stint in vulnerability management. I did a stint in audit. I did a stint in risk management. And then from there, I left CIBC and Scalar Decisions, which was a relatively small organization, though national across the country. They were looking for somebody to run their compliance and governance program. So I applied for that position, and then I worked there for a couple of years. And then eventually Scalar got acquired by CDW Canada in 2019. And then as of January of 2020, we became CDW Canada. And I'm still there, and I continue working for that organization. To sum it up, the beginning of my career was definitely more technical in nature. And over the course of time, I kind of pulled myself away from the keyboard and I kind of immersed myself in all things governance, risk, and compliance.
You have an amazing career path, almost like the picture perfect of. No, I'm serious. Like of
Yeah,
like, getting an entry level position, doing some manual labor, doing all kind of
yeah.
things you need to do, never asking any questions, and then, getting more and more roles and responsibilities, and then, picking up to becoming a senior cybersecurity executive. So, I mean, kudos to you to doing that. And then you also, I mean, I noticed you have a lot of certifications that you've done. So you keep up with, even though you're in a managerial role today, you keep up with technology, right? You've done quite a lot of certifications, right?
You have to. I mean, certainly, younger in my career when you begin learning the technologies, whether it's, believe it or not, the company I started at, I'm going to date myself, they were still using Novell NetWare. They were just in the process of migrating over to Windows. So, when you're at that point in your career, and obviously coming from the background that I came from, knowing how to learn and study through secondary and then through university, yeah, my philosophy is if I'm going to learn the tool or I'm going to learn the application or I'm going to learn how to do something, I might as well sit for the exam and kind of get letters after my name. So certainly, earlier in my career, that's why I got Cisco and Checkpoint and Microsoft and Linux and those types of things. And then as I went into the GRC role, that's why I got, my CISP and my CISM and my CISA and my CRISC. Because for me, it's just I'm more motivated to learn something when I understand there's an exam that I have to take, and I think that comes from just my schooling. For me, it's a way that I motivate myself. So yeah.
Super interesting. So a lot of people, they stick around and they're always all technical, right? They might manage like, some technical team, but they're typically a individual contributor, quote unquote, right?
Yep.
So what was the turning point for you to move away from the kind of the hands-on roles to a more, kind of managerial role? And then why have you decided to do that? Some people are totally content with like having hands-on, ongoing hands-on, role the whole time, and you can make, great living doing that.
Absolutely. And I have to say, and I think everybody viewing this either now or the recording later, I think we've all, in the course of our careers or even in our lives, we've either worked with some people or we were mentored by somebody, and it gave us an insight as to, what it is to be a good leader, to inspire, to motivate, to really want to grow people. Um, as I was younger in my career, I've always very attracted to people that I aspire to be like.
Mhm.
People who really motivated me, people who wanted me to be better than what I currently was. So it was always an attractiveness that I think I had. And as I've grown up, um, I'd say the thing that I do the most is growing people. It brings me such joy. And because I've worked with people who, in my opinion, were not very good leaders, I've also been on the other side and I felt that pain. And very early in my career, I've, decided that, if I've suffered because I was working with or working for somebody who I didn't think was a good leader or a good manager,
Mhm.
I've just felt like, why would I want to do that to somebody else? And so I really think it's important to pay it forward. And so, all the mistakes that I've made throughout my life and my career, if I can save somebody from making those mistakes, why wouldn't I want to do that? Also at CIBC, the CISO that I worked under, who's a fantastic individual, he sat me down earlier in my career, and he told me that he thought I had the ability to lead. I guess he saw certain attributes in me. Maybe it was my character, or I'm not really sure, but he said that what I possess, I had the attributes to lead people. And again, that was something I really took to heart. I had other mentors while at CIBC who really took me under their wing and exposed me to all things leadership and personal development. And I think that's why a lot of what I do when I'm not at work is I've done coaching programs, and I just, for whatever reason, I just love this stuff, personal development. Um, so I guess to answer your question, I always knew that it was something that I wanted to do, was to not really lead people, but to really help grow people. And I think that's the number one thing that a leader can do is to grow more leaders. And it's something that I really love doing.
So this is really insightful. So in terms of um, mentorship specifically for cybersecurity, from your experience, what are people looking for, and what type of skills they kind of are lacking, or what kind of help they need to become better at what they do. Where do you see the particular gaps for people that you work with and mentor?
So I think the typical, or at least the stereotype that people have around IT professionals,
Hmm.
is or they can be introverted. And again, introversion or extroversion, neither of those are good or bad things, just based on the makeup or personality of that person.
Hmm.
And I would have to say that I would say I kind of lean introversion. And when I say that, all that means is that, throughout the course of my day, and Susan Cain has an amazing way that she put it in her book called Quiet. People who are introverted at the beginning of the day, they start off with coins in their
Hmm.
hands,
Hmm.
and those coins represent their energy. And throughout the course of the day, when they have meetings or they have interactions with people, and at the end of every interaction, they give away a coin.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the day, they feel depleted. So it means they have to, they'd like to be by themselves, or they like to reflect, and that's how they get their energy back. People who are extroverted begin the day with no coins. And the more interactions that they have with people, they actually receive coins, they receive energy. In my mind, that's the best explanation of introversion versus extroversion I've ever heard, and it's a great book. Um, so I think because the stereotypical IT person tends to be a little introverted, they tend to, in my experience, not all, but in my experience, they tend to shy away from things like presentations and public speaking.
Hmm.
And because of that, it's a little bit more challenging for those people to get out there, to build relationships, to interact with people. And so I would say the number one area that people should really focus, and it's absolutely what I've done because it's something that I struggled with earlier in my career,
Hmm.
is focus on those human skills. I don't want to say soft skills, because when you say hard versus soft, it almost seems like one is better than the other, and that is not the case. Earlier in your career, those hard, more technical skills are probably your foundational skills. So you build that technical acumen, and you can talk with various people in your organization. I'd say as you move up in an organization, a lot of us use those hard skills less. And what we depend on are those human skills, like communication, like presenting, like empathy. So if there's an area of focus, um, especially if you're earlier in your career, I would say focus on those human skills. Because at the end of the day, um, we're all in sales and marketing, whether I'm trying to sell you a product, whether I'm trying to sell you a solution, or whether I'm trying to sell you an idea. At the end of the day, I have to know how to communicate and convey my wishes to you in a language that you'll understand. So I would say that is an area of focus for everybody at any stage of their career, especially when you're starting out.
I absolutely love that. I think that there's not enough emphasis on that. This type of emotional intelligence that is required to advance yourself. So, in a corporate environment, let's say you work at a bank or a larger company, where do you, in your past life working there, see the opportunity to develop these skills? Because it's so hard. Like during the day to day, you're so busy, putting out fires and dealing with projects and so on, and dealing with your peers and your supervisors and whatever the case may be. Where do you find the opportunity to develop your, kind of interpersonal skills, the not the soft skills, but kind of the emotional skills associated with being successful?
I would hope that most people work for an organization that may have internal training programs that you can take advantage of. Beyond that, because I understand a lot of people aren't in that fortunate situation. To be honest, a lot of what I've learned is based on books that I've read, um, based on which are free. Anybody can go take out a book, and I have a litany of books that I've read in my past. But again, it's not only about reading the book, it's about taking what you read and putting that into practice into your day-to-day life.
Hmm.
I've also listened to plethora of podcasts that I follow on a daily and weekly basis, all about business communication, marketing, information security. And there are programs out there. Obviously, if you have the means to spend money. I know, speaking for myself personally, like I've gone through the Dale Carnegie Leadership Program. I'm also now a graduate coach. I was fortunate enough that my organization paid for that program.
Hmm.
And because I got so much out of it, and because I enjoyed watching people grow and kind of go through that journey from that first week to the 12th week of that program, I now volunteer for that program, and I get to go through that course over and over, and it's free. So there's a amazing amount of information out there in the world if you want to learn um, how to get better at communicating. And in terms of how to practice, you just have to practice every day. And yeah, you're going to fall, but it doesn't matter how many times you fall down. It matters how many times we get up, right? And it's not really a failure if we learn from it. So I don't believe in winning and losing. I believe in winning and learning. And like Bill Gates says, if you do lose or fall, that gives us the opportunity to stand back and reflect on what just happened. And we make a plan of how to come back better. And that's how we learn as individuals, as people, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely amazing insight. So, in your opinion, why is it so difficult for new graduates? I mean, we hear that all the time. New graduates coming in trying to get into the industry. On one side, you have companies saying, "Oh, there's lack of skilled workforce. We can't find people." And then on the other side, you have a lot of new graduates, people that are, done through certifications, college, different programs, and they're struggling to get that first kind of entry level job, the one that gave you the opportunity to propel yourself into the cybersecurity career?
So, I mean, I think it depends. I think it depends on a lot on the candidate. It also depends on the organization. Um, Again, at our organization, we have a co-op program. So every year, I have good relationships with certain colleges in our areas and university. And every year, I have summer students. And I give you a perfect example. Uh, a co-op of ours that worked with us for 8 months in 2019, 2020, I just hired full time. So I would say there are certainly opportunities out there. I know a lot of the colleges in Canada and certainly in my province of Ontario, they do have summer student programs or internship programs or co-op programs. And those, I wish I had that when I was going to school. I didn't. But the opportunity to work at an organization and get like actual practical in the trenches experience is invaluable. And the quality of the candidates that we see are also extremely impressive. The other thing I'll say is a lot of that comes back to that communication piece. You can be the most brilliant candidate. You can have the deepest technical abilities and skills,
Hmm.
but if you're not good at interviewing, or if you're not good at communicating, a lot of times you're not going to get the opportunity. That's why I think being able to communicate and convey ideas, it's probably the most important skill um, that you should work on.
It's amazing, and it's absolutely amazing insight because typically when people are looking for jobs, they're so focused on getting the hands-on experience, right, the technical skills and so on, and not so much the interview skills, right, the ones that kind of make or
It's
break.
important.
And also, do you think that because the industry is becoming more mature, you know, like 20 years ago, or whatever, I mean, things were just starting to kind of build up. So when somebody wanted to do cybersecurity, there was not really much of certifications out there. You typically did IT work. You studied maybe computer science or some other type of discipline, and then you fell into it because throughout that process, somebody needed like somebody who knows quote unquote IT security because that's what it
Yeah,
was called at the time. Do you
yeah.
think that now, because of all the maturity level and all those certifications and all that stuff, companies are looking for more specialized type of knowledge, and that creates almost like a barrier to entry?
So I would say yes and no. For certain positions, if my organization's hiring for somebody to work in our SOC, as an example, or Security Operations Center,
Hmm.
and we use a particular tool set or suite within our organization, yes, it is true that we're probably going to want somebody who has skills in that tool set. So in that example, yeah, there's some specialized experience that we're looking for. Um, However, when I hire, um, I've always said to people in my organization and outside, um, I can always teach somebody how to use a particular tool, or I can always teach somebody a particular process. But the things I can't teach people are things like integrity, honesty, transparency, character. So, I mean, when I'm hiring, and mostly I hire for like, GRC, where, though technical skills are like an amazing foundation if they have it.
Hmm.
For me, I tend to look at the character of the person, the emotional intelligence, can the person communicate? So again, those human skills.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think that the hiring managers are somewhat like you, but then the people that are creating these job posting, job descriptions are very much hard skills. They're looking to have these type
Yep.
of requirements and so on. And so I think there's almost a slightly disconnect between the two. Um, so what do you recommend for people that are trying to get into the field, and specifically people don't realize, like, look at you, right? You're doing so many different things today, right? Governance, compliance, and so on. But I think that people that are entry level, they're not aware what type of roles are available out there, right? Because I think when you do certifications, you study, like, okay, pen testing, or reverse engineering, right?
Okay.
But there are just a whole slew of professions out there. As you mentioned, you're looking for somebody with a, you know, governance, risk, and compliance. Yeah, and I'm not sure you can take a program that teaches you that. So, what do you recommend to somebody who does want to get into this space, or not really realizing what's out there in terms of different types of roles?
That's a
And I
really
know,
good question. It's
and
a
it's
no.
tough questions, I know.
It's a really good question. Um, I would say at the beginning of your career, or the guidance or support I've given to people that I've mentored is it's really important to find that area of information security. Easier said than done, I understand. But identify an area of information security that you're interested in, whether that's pen testing, reverse engineering, working on a SIM, working with firewalls, working with networking. And once you've identified, what is that domain that you're really interested in, then begin to research, okay, I'm really interested in networking. Explore networking. Who are all the, big stakeholders in networking?
Hmm.
And really like hone in, like what are those specific skills that you're interested in or skills that you would like to explore or grow, and maybe come at it that way.
Hmm.
I mean, it's also important to see what's happening just in the world. Like obviously, AI is really important right now. Uh, anything crypto is really important right now. Anything cloud is really important right now. And there are associations out there, such as the IC squares of the world, ISACAs of the world, CSAs of the world, that do put out free content that people can learn and begin to build a foundation.
Hmm.
Like it's often, a lot of people still ask me, like, what is that foundational information security certification that I should get? It's kind of, it won't necessarily give me the depth, but it'll give me breadth. Um, I still think, the CISSP by IC squared is a fantastic certification. It was probably the first non-technical certification I took when I really wanted to branch out from all the technical certs that I was taking earlier in my career. Um, and I still think it's an invaluable certification. I mean, the other thing which helps is if you're lucky enough to have somebody who's mentoring you or helping you or guiding you,
Hmm.
um, they can help you identify what are those different domains in information security, and which one of those domains would you be interested in exploring or growing in.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done the IC square, the CSSP a while back myself as well, and I completely agree with you. It's a very good primer for all the different
Yeah,
domains out there, and also it requires you kind of an understanding of where things fit in a kind of a
yes,
global, which I think is really interesting because once you do this, it really gives you a clear understanding of the entire profession of cybersecurity, right? So I agree with you there. Um, a quick question for you. So, uh, you know, what is that you do every day? Like you are a chief security officer, right? I think that's you're laughing because it's a bit
what do I
people throw
do?
the CISO, the CSO, acronym around, and if you're not in this space and this is not, you're not one, people are wondering, okay, what is it you do? What are your responsibilities? I know that you probably attend a lot of meetings, for sure. But
That is accurate.
what is it you do? And then the kind of the follow up question to that is that anything in particular that you like and potentially don't like about it.
What do I do? I, so I run the information security program for CDW Canada. Okay,
Hmm.
great. What does that mean? So CDW Canada, we are certified against several information security frameworks.
Hmm.
As an example, we're certified against, ISO 27001. We're certified against NIST cybersecurity framework. We are certified against PCI DSS, which is a credit card company framework.
Hmm.
So a lot of what I do on a daily basis is I run the security program that is required by those three frameworks. So I provide governance and oversight. Um, I ensure all the policies and procedures and standard in the organization, are reviewed and are up to date and reflect the reality on the ground. I also ensure that all the controls that we've implemented in our organization are being monitored, like access control, vulnerability assessing, pen testing. So I provide oversight and to the board that all the things that we've implemented in the organization are actually running and they're effective. And I report metrics up to them once a month. I mean, that, at a very high level, that's what I do. Um, but really, what it is, and what I think all leadership is, it's problem solving. And so it's really funny. They were interviewing one of the dragons from Dragon's Den, that TV show. I think it was Barbara Corcoran, and somebody asked her, like, what is leadership to you? Great question. And she said, leadership is problem solving. And it's true. The more I think about it, what I really do all day is I solve problems. It could be a problem with control. It can be a problem with a person. It could be a problem with a vendor. And I've always loved solving problems. When I was younger, I'd like building with my hands. I built puzzles and then models. When I started in IT, I liked building networks. I just love using my hands and solving problems. So yeah, I would say I solve problems all day, every day, and I love it. I find it very challenging.
There was a second part to that question, but I have to ask you this, right? So, first of all, it's profound. I think that problem solving, if there's one skill that you need to learn, again, aside from the soft skills or quote unquote soft skills, right, is problem solving. And I don't know if, and you can maybe back me up, if the education system today, after we both finished like so many years of school and so on, really teaches you that. I, again, and you can back me up. I think there's not enough of that. I think a lot of it is pretty structured.
Yeah, I would
They don't.
agree.
And then your role though is very unstructured in the sense that you get problems all the time that you've never seen before. Uh, Potentially, you know, uh, have a very creative type of solutions, right?
Mhm.
And then have a lot of moving parts. So that's I think that's kind of the definition of loose definition of like the actual problems that you're currently facing.
I would agree. I think traditional schooling, um, which has taken a beating over the last several years, um, they're really good at teaching you how to, m- I don't want to say memorize, but in some cases, memorize a certain common body of knowledge,
Hmm.
and then kind of regurgitate that in an exam or testing setting. Um, if- and I would say that's like secondary, elementary, secondary, high school. For me, at least in university, I mean, I thought my bachelor's did do a really good job of teaching us how to problem solve, in a general sense. Um, but I do agree that there's a big difference between, um, like what it means from a philosophical point of view, and then, when the rubber meets the road point of view, when you're actually in the trenches on a day to day. So I absolutely agree with you that it's absolutely it's difficult, and our traditional school system doesn't do a fantastic job of teaching you those skills.
So if you wanted to, just like we mentioned, become better at some of the interpersonal skills, right? What would you recommend? And I know these are tough questions, so apologies in advance.
It's all
What
right.
would you recommend? And you're doing a great job, by the way. Like, I mean, guys, guys and girls. This is not scripted, okay? So Daniel is facing here with some very tough questions that he has to pause and think about. Um, in your opinion, what would be a good exercise if somebody wanted to practice this? Because and you are in a real life simulation, right? Because you're responsible for a lot in the organization, and you have the problems thrown at you. But if you're not like that, if you don't have the capacity, or you're not in a role where you have that ability to experience that, um, how would you, if that were you, would you practice these type of skills?
I mean, the way that I did it when I was in that phase of my career, um, books, podcasts, um, try to um, form relationships with people that you want to emulate.
Hmm.
Um, what somebody said told me many years ago, and then I heard it reiterated again by Simon Sinek, who's a virtual mentor of mine, virtually meaning I've never met him, but I've read all his books. Is if you want to keep growing, um, always surround yourself with those people that you want to grow into. So always try to be the not smartest person in the room. And that's why I think building relationships with people that you aspire to be like is probably the most important piece of advice that I can give anybody. And that's certainly what happened to me. And I'll give you a very, very quick story. There was somebody who I reported into at CIBC.
Hmm.
His name was Tom. And he was just like, in your mind's eye, if you can think of somebody who has motivated you, somebody who you think is an inspiring leader, somebody who you've been like, yeah, I want to be like that guy. He's incredible. Tom was like that for me. And, one day I kind of invited him out for coffee. He was a VP of internal audit.
Hmm.
Um, and I sat him down and I just said, Tom, you have this amazing ability with people. And I've not seen the ability that you have in too many other people in my life. And I want to learn how to be like I want to learn how to do what you do. And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Daniel, if I can teach you one thing, let it be this. Anything you will ever achieve or want to achieve in your life won't happen without the help and support of other people. So always let them know how much you appreciate them and how much it matters what they do for you. And that it just hit me. It absolutely hit me like a ton of bricks. And I fully believe that was the infancy of my love for all things leadership and personal development. Um, so I would say surround yourself with people who you aspire to be like. And there's an old saying that I've read is you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So whether those people are people that help grow you and nurture you, or whether those people are those who suck the energy from you, you're the average of those 5 people. And I ask all of you to ask yourself, who are the 5 people that you spend the most time with, whether it's families, friends, coworkers? And really ask yourself, are these people helping me grow into the person that I want to be like?
Hmm.
Or in some cases, are they holding me back? And if they're holding you back, then potentially you have a tough decision to make. And it's those kind of decisions that we have to make as we grow as individuals that I think can help us become better human beings. So yeah,
I think a pause here is warranted. It's very profound. It's really good, Daniel. I think that this is something that we don't need to talk about enough, and I think that uh, you had the insight to go and ask for help. I think a lot of
yeah,
people do not do that. Either they're afraid, they're
it's
yeah,
vulnerability, David. It's
right.
vulnerability. And for those who have never read anything or watched Brene Brown's TED Talk,
Hmm.
I recommend it to everybody. Brene
Well,
Brown, I've read a few of her books. It's all about not only about vulnerability, but it's about leaning into that vulnerability. And if I think about in my life, those leaders who I've always aspired to be like, those who have leaned into their vulnerabilities, those who have showed me that they're just people like me and they have fears and they have hangups. They don't put themselves on this pedestal. Um, those are the people that I want to be like. And the reason why people don't ask for help is because they're self-conscious and they don't want to be
totally.
vulnerable. But the more you lead into your vulnerability, you find out that not only is vulnerability not a weakness, it is a strength. And we have to embrace that strength in order for us to grow.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is something. Even doing what you do right now, it's not trivial, right? A lot of people are not. They're camera shy or stage shy or whatever you call it. So, getting out of your comfort zone and doing stuff like that really helps as well on a regular basis.
Yep.
So we're kind of running out of time, but I would love to touch upon a couple of kind of a cybersecurity stuff as well, since you have a really tremendous insight in terms of what's happening around, because you work for you're part of a very, very large organization, deal with a lot of
Yep.
different customers and so on, and
Yep.
you're responsible for governance, risk, and compliance, and so on. So, tell me a bit. What are kind of the one or two biggest struggles for organizations right now, your customers around GRC, in how do you consult and help them? Because I'm assuming, Daniel, that since you have such a big role, you're being brought in to some customer facing meetings when
Yep.
they require additional insight. You're like kind of the big guns when and a salesperson
I do not
requires
have big guns, trust me.
no, but like when they bring in like the expert, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
um
yeah.
so that's what I meant.
Yeah. So for our organization, I think
Mhm,
it's a challenge like most organizations. Um, Communication. I've worked in very small organizations, under 500, and then I've worked in organizations, close to 40,000.
mhm,
And what I can tell you, uh, both ends of that spectrum, the number one issue that organizations have is communication and the fact that there are silos. So the thing that I work on every day is trying to break down those barriers, those silos, and building bridges
mhm,
between the various areas of the organization. So the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. And that one group isn't doing the exact same work that another group is doing. So I would say internally, and every organization I've ever worked in, it's always been a challenge. So you can never over communicate, in my opinion, but it's very easy to under communicate. So that's certainly something within our organization that I work on absolutely on a daily basis. Some days I do a better job than others, but it's certainly it's something that's very top of mind every day. In terms of customers who I deal with, um, I've always been a big fan and a big supporter of frameworks. And I mentioned earlier in the hot seat, ISO 27001 and the cybersecurity framework and
mhm,
PCI DSS. Let's stand back for a minute and let's explore. Well, what's a framework? Well, a framework is just a set of best practices that have been put into a bucket or domain. So we'll take ISO 27001 as an example. Right, they've got a bucket or domain on human resource security. They have a bucket or domain on physical security. They have a bucket or domain on operational security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are about 14 buckets. And the amazing thing about frameworks is these frameworks are put together by, well, in some cases it's paid, in most cases it's not. But these frameworks are then used by organizations, both private, public, military. They go to these frameworks when they're looking for guidance. How do you go about implementing best practices around HR security or physical security or operational security or incident response or business continuity? So you know what, the the clients that I tend to be pulled in, if we're talking about a particular issue or problem, I will always refer them back to a framework for guidance. Um, a lot of the frameworks are free. You can go to the NIST website right now, which is probably the most popular framework in North America.
mhm.
It comes out of the US, and anybody can look at the framework for guidance. if I were to start a new organization tomorrow, what would I do first day? I would choose a framework for the organization. Pick a framework, whatever the framework is, it doesn't really matter. They're all very, very similar. There's generally a lot of overlap. And then follow the framework. Implement the best practices that all organizations around the world, came and decided that these are the best practices in the industry. And I think that will give your organization a firm foundation from an information security point of view. So I'm a massive framework person. Not surprising. I work in GRC. Um, I just think they're there to use, and I think more organizations should use and leverage them. That's why they're there.
So, how do you, in actuality, go ahead and apply some of these frameworks? I mean, because a lot of organizations are not there. They lack some of the basic. The basic. You have frameworks, but they have, their gaps are actually pretty basic, right? So before they go into NIST, they need to like solve the kind of top 10 issues that they maybe even two-factor or whatever, access control, whatever the
Yep.
case may be. And then so that's the first question. And the second question, you do a lot of third party risk as well. So how do you
Yep.
apply kind of these frameworks to your partners? Because that's also, exposes you quite a bit as they are partners and they have particular access to your systems.
Okay. So first question, and you brought up the example around access control.
Hmm.
I'm going to push back a little bit, and I'm going to say access control is part of every major framework I've ever read or used. So to say, well, I'm a young organization and I'm not mature enough to begin using a framework, I personally think that's a little bit of a cop out. Um, if you want to become more mature as an organization, you have to begin putting in the best practices that the frameworks are telling you to put in. Whether you're using, again, ISO or NIST, whether you're using like the critical security controls from SANS or from the Center for Internet Security, these frameworks help our organizations build the strong, firm foundation, which we then build on. And if we don't keep our foundations firm, they're going to be porous, they're going to be brittle, and they're going to crumble. So, to say I'm not mature enough to use a framework, I don't buy that. Even basic, very basic controls, like doing background checks, like doing a quarterly access reviews. Anybody can do those things. You don't really need technology. Those are in all the frameworks I've already mentioned. So I would still point people to a framework. And yes, if you can't implement every control a framework is telling you to, that's okay also. The point of a framework is, unless you're going to be certified, is the framework is there to be used by the organization. So if an organization isn't mature enough to enable two-factor or MFA, then they just don't implement that control at the moment.
Hmm.
But there are still other controls that the framework is talking about, which you do implement, you can implement. And then when you become more mature, then you implement those other controls that you couldn't at the beginning.
Hmm.
So I still think leveraging frameworks is it's the best way to go about maturing your information security program.
It's so interesting. And then, excuse me, how do you
And the second question, no, it's
mhm,
all right. And the
yeah,
second question
sorry.
about vendors. So vendors is a tough one, um, and it's a challenge. It's a daily challenge. A lot of us in information security, we use this thing called SIG, which is a litany of like 300 questions, standard information gathering. And I hate filling them out as an organization. And I really hate asking other organizations to fill them out because nobody wants to fill out 300 questions. And if you go to companies like Amazon and you go to big companies or cloud service providers like Amazon and Azure and you ask them to fill out 300 questions, they're going to tell you to go fly a kite So how do you reduce the risk? How do you manage the risk? Um, the way that we do it and the way that I've done it historically is through terms and conditions in our contracts. So there are terms and conditions that you can embed in contractual requirements, like right to audit, source code escrow, background requirements, breach notification, indemnity, liability, um, cyber insurance. There are terms and conditions that organizations can put in their contracts with vendors that can help mitigate some of that risk. You can also force vendors to comply with certain security certifications like ISO 27001, not like NIST CSF. You can force vendors to go through a SOC 2 Type 2 audit every year. And what that allows us to do as the client is we're relying on the opinion of a third party, of an independent third party, like Deloitte, like KPMG, like PwC, so that audit firm. We're relying on their opinion that the control environment of our vendors are both designed and operating effectively. So that's what I've done, and that's what I've seen in my past. There's either you're going to get them to fill out a lot of questions, or you're going to do it through terms and conditions. And those are kind of the two ways that I've seen it done. And those are the two ways that I continue to do it. The smaller organizations will answer the questionnaires. The larger organizations won't. So you do it through terms and conditions. And again, it's not only about forcing. It's not only about requiring the vendors to comply with certain requirements,
Mhm.
but it's also not all vendors are created equal. You have some vendors that are more critical than others. So what I've done and what I've seen done is, vendors are tiered, tier one, tier two, tier three, based on criticality or the sensitivity of the data. And, kind of critical vendors, those are reviewed annually.
Mhm.
Tier two is maybe every 3 years. Tier three or low is every 4 or 5 years. And, that's the way that we ensure our vendors are doing the right things. Because at the end of the day, we can delegate a responsibility to our vendors, but you can never delegate accountability. God forbid, should something ever happen, it's going to come back to the organization
Mhm. Mhm.
because it is incumbent upon us as an organization to ensure that our vendors are doing the right things, that they're managing our data appropriately, that they're managing our data in the same way that we would manage our own data. And that's what our customers expect of us. And in order to discharge us of that responsibility, we have to ensure that our vendors are managed.
Yeah, totally. And again, this is. I feel like we're running out of time, but I feel like we can do this for at least a couple more hours, and we haven't even covered like the topics we wanted to. But why don't we stop here, and I'll invite you over either to do online or physically in New York City. Things are starting to open up.
Sure, absolutely.
And if for the people that watch this and want to get in touch, again, you're fabulous. You're giving back to the community. What's the best way for people to reach you?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach out to me. Um, and again, I'm always happy. I actually thrive on it. If you have any questions regarding anything we've discussed or even not, I'm always happy to sit for a physical or a virtual coffee. I love doing it and I love giving back to the community. So yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn and I will respond.
Yeah, it's awesome. And people, get out of your shell. Reach out to Daniel if he has some tremendous insight on cybersecurity, leadership, personal development, and so on. He's been through a journey that I believe most of you would like to join or do yourself. So if you don't mind, just reach out anytime. Daniel, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much for wasting 55 minutes of your time today.
It's
And
never a waste, never a waste. And I'll leave you with one thing.
sure,
I got out a really good book.
sure.
So Navy SEALs, when they get new recruits and they go through the initial training, the first thing that they tell new recruits on day one is um, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's if you want to grow as a person, we have to become uncomfortable. And the more uncomfortable you are, the more you're going to grow. And so I would just say to everybody out there, and I do this for myself in my own life, if I feel like I'm too comfortable, if it's in a particular environment or in a particular role, I've got to ask myself, how can I make myself uncomfortable so that I can keep growing as a person? So what I would say is, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and comfort and growth can't coexist. They're different things.
Easier said than done, Daniel. I mean,
Absolutely,
we are a creature of comfort. That's
absolutely,
I think it's in our part of our DNA. So that's why it's a, it's a bit of a struggle, but you can do it if you wanted to. It's just a matter of like watching people like yourself and then reading kind of the right books that talk about it and be motivated every day if all possible. Um, so thank you again for joining. Thanks all for joining online. Much appreciated. Looking forward to seeing you at the next event. And stay safe all. Take care.